At Thanksgiving, Dad sneered, "You can't even afford a mobile home," not knowing his son owns the $6.8 billion company that just bought his. The table erupted. My uncle barked a laugh, spilling red wine onto the white tablecloth. Dad didn't even look at the mess, his eyes locked on me with familiar stinging indifference. "I'm serious, Elias. Look at you. That sweater has a hole in the sleeve. I bet you're still living in that windowless studio apartment downtown. I just kept cutting my turkey. It's a functional space, Dad." "Functional?" Dad laughed, loud and sharp. "You've spent 10 years playing around with startups that never went anywhere. Meanwhile, your brother Julian just made partner at the firm." Julian sat to my left in a $3,000 suit, his face pinched into a smirk. He hadn't worked a day of manual labor in his life, yet he was the family idol. Dad adored him because Julian played the corporate game. I had left home to build something from the ground up, refusing Dad's help, his name, and his toxic approval. "Julian understands legacy," Dad said, clinking his glass against mine hard enough to chip the rim. You're just a cautionary tale for the grandkids." "I think he's doing his best," Mom interjected, though her eyes remained on the turkey. "His best is a failure," Dad cut her off. He turned to Aunt Linda. "Linda, didn't you have that opening at the local hardware store? Maybe you could put him on the loading dock. It would be a step up from whatever he does now." "I have a career, Dad," I said quietly. Julian leaned over, whispering loudly enough for the whole table to hear. "Hey, Eli, if the hardware store gig doesn't work out, I'm hiring interns for data entry. It's mind-numbing, but it's real work. No experience required." I didn't react. I just focused on my plate. Dad sighed, leaning back. "Let's be realistic. Julian is the only one who secures our future. Speaking of which, our acquisition by Aethelgard Tech closes tomorrow. It's a $6.8 billion deal. That's real success. It's a huge milestone for us," Julian added, checking his watch. "The executives are coming here tomorrow morning to finalize the integration. Dad, you should probably ask Elias to leave tonight. We need to look like a tight-knit, high-performing family." "Good point," Dad said, not meeting my eyes. "Elias, I'm sure you have a bus to catch or a landlord to dodge. You're not needed here tomorrow." I looked at the window. A car pulled into the driveway. It wasn't the police and it wasn't a neighbor. A man in a simple charcoal suit stepped out and walked toward the front door. I recognized Marcus Thorne, Aethelgard's COO. Dad stood up, his face brightening. "They're early. Everyone, look presentable. Maybe they'll be impressed by the whole family." Dad threw the door open, ready to play the successful CEO. "Marcus, what a surprise. We weren't expecting you until morning." Thorne didn't smile. He just stepped inside, briefcase in hand. He glanced at the table, his eyes scanning until they landed on me. He walked over, pulled a folder from his bag, and set it next to my plate. "Mr. Vance, the board finalized the purchase of Titan Logistics this afternoon. Everything is in order." The room went quiet. Dad looked from the folder to me. "Mr. Vance?" Thorne looked confused. "Yes, Elias Vance, the majority shareholder of Aethelgard." Julian dropped his fork. The sound hit the hardwood like a gunshot. My uncle sat frozen, his mouth still full of stuffing. Dad stood in the center of the foyer, his hand still on the doorknob, looking like he'd aged 10 years in 10 seconds. "You?" Dad asked, his voice cracking. "You bought my company?" "I bought it to integrate it, Dad," I said, standing up. "It was the only way to save the logistics division from the debt Julian's team accumulated last quarter." Dad looked at Julian, then back at me. The smugness that had defined him for 30 years had evaporated. His shoulders slumped, and he looked smaller than I had ever seen him. I thought you were struggling."